Welcome back. Decades of isolation under military rule has meant that many of the magnificent buildings here in Yangon, formerly known as Rangoon, haven't yet been bulldozed by developers. But as the country moves forward and the money men begin to circle, how long can these neglected treasures avoid the wrecking ball? Here's Alec Allen.
On the streets of Yangon, it's still possible to conjure up images of time gone by. Under the British Empire, the city was known as Rangoon, and imposing imperial buildings still lie in a landscape of golden pagodas. In 1962, the country fell into the hands of the military, marking the beginning of socialist rule. Poverty and neglect ensued. But Myanmar's economic stagnation and isolation from the outside world unwittingly saved the city's spectacular colonial buildings. Although much is decaying and run down, Yangon now has the largest surviving collection of colonial architecture anywhere in Southeast Asia.
This is the place where the Myanmar people learned to be modern. It's where they connected with the outside world. It's where their greatest writers, artists, statesmen lived and worked for decades.
What's in all these buildings then?
These are government offices, but they're often half empty or some of them are not used at all.
Sant Mint U is an historian who founded the Yangon Heritage Trust. We're in the historic financial heart of British Burma on Lower Pansadan Street. Trade once flourished in these banks and fine department stores, and the Irrawaddy Flotilla Company operated the largest river fleet on Earth.
I think you can imagine, especially on this street, so many of these buildings could be renovated, done up, found a new lease of life.
Thant returned to Myanmar after years living abroad. He has been driving Myanmar's government to protect historic buildings by law and develop a cohesive urban plan.
The worst thing is that the buildings are torn down. The second worst thing is that this becomes a sanitized tourist zone that's good for tourists and rich people, and all the old poor families have to leave. So we have to find a solution which encourages as many of the old communities to stay as possible.
Dola San Win and her family have lived inside the dome at the top of a former luxury department store for 40 years. Today, the building is derelict, home to around 20 families, some law offices, an art gallery and a guest house. Like many buildings in Yangon, ownership is held by multiple parties. As owners passed away, their descendants inherited a mess of unpaid repair bills and government taxes. The fate of the building in Yangon's new age is unclear. Restoration will be expensive, and many consider it cheaper to build something new.
Hi, Cyrus.
Hello, Ella.
I'm Ella.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
Yeah.
Thanks for having us here. What a wonderful building.
Thank you so much.
What did it used to be?
This was the former headquarters of the Burma Railway Company.
Okay.
This was during the colonial times. It was built in 1877, so almost 140 years old now.
Cyrus Pun is a developer who's turning one of the city's most prominent heritage buildings into a luxury boutique hotel.
Cyrus, is it difficult to make a refurbishment like this economically viable?
If you are purely financially driven, you probably want to knock it down and build a new one. Of course, we look at our investment in this building with a much longer perspective.
Cyrus hired heritage architects who are investigating the original colours and materials used in the building to make the restoration as authentic as possible. He says poorly managed renovations are even more of a threat to Yangon's heritage buildings than bulldozers.
I think it's very important down to the individual developers to make sure that they don't ruin the cityscape. They don't destroy a heritage that has been a long history and an important part of the city. So there needs to be some social responsibility to that.
100 years ago, royalty, celebrities and artists arrived in the city along the river. Today, this historic riverfront is slowly being revived. A modern bar called The Union has recently given Yangon's Red Cross building a new lease of life. Owner Nico Elliott says laws governing foreign investment in Myanmar are still somewhat unclear.
There's a lot of people here looking at opportunities, a lot of discussion about that, but actually very little action because of perhaps still the risk, perhaps the level of investment, the lack of certainty about what the political situation might be. So I guess combining those two, you're not going to necessarily look to the old buildings and look to go into those and restore them.
This makes buildings, like the wooden Pegu Club, owned by the Department of Defence, both a renovator's dream and a potential nightmare. This was once a gentleman's club, the epitome of British colonialism, immortalised as the place where Rudyard Kipling was inspired to write the famous poem Mandalay.
Being here evokes a sense of romanticism and faded glory, but for some it's a reminder of a past Myanmar would rather forget. Restoring colonial-era buildings just isn't a priority in a nation that's forging itself a new beginning.
The Yangon City Development Committee has a list of 188 buildings that are protected, but the Pegu Club is not one of them. A lack of appreciation and a lack of funds mean Myanmar's government is forced to look elsewhere for creative solutions to save heritage buildings like this one.
In the short term or even the medium term, the amount of money that's going to be required for many of these buildings or for a comprehensive effort, I think is beyond the ability of the government at a time when there are so many other priorities as well.
The Secretariat stands at the heart of the city, yet it's remained shrouded in mystery for more than half a century. Originally built as the seat of colonial British administration, the 120-year-old building sprawls across almost 16 acres of land, an entire city block. The complex was declared off-limits to the public by the military in 1962, and few have ever seen inside. It's become synonymous with the exclusion of the Myanmar people from their national history and a symbol of the country's vast potential waiting to be unlocked.
I think everyone has seen from the outside this building, but when you get inside it, it's so much bigger than you think, isn't it?
Yes, it's a wonder.
Yeah, a real wonder.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are working closely together with Heritage.
Once again, it's private funding that's driving the restoration effort. Lei Yiso is the managing director of the Yanauma Art Group, which was awarded the lease on the Secretariat to turn it into a museum and cultural centre.
I envision this as a public place where everybody can come and enjoy this national building, and then everybody can better understand our history and culture.
The Secretariat holds important historical significance for Myanmar. Independence from Britain was declared here, and the nation's first parliament was convened inside this building. It's also where national hero General Aung San was assassinated in 1947, an event that changed the course of the country's history.
I think it's really sad that the people of Myanmar haven't been able to come here and feel the weight of the history that's within these walls. Hopefully soon that'll change.
The Secretariat sits at the epicentre of a city on the cusp of great change. One that could see Yangon become Asia's next monolithic metropolis, or a unique place where diversity and history is celebrated and saved.
Ella Callan and the grandeur that was Old Rangoon. There's a blog online from Ella with more on her thoughts on the changing face of this city. Plus, you'll find an answer there to the questions some of you have been asking, why we're now using the name Myanmar instead of Burma. Go to sbs.com.au